full-time MBA class, and this particular event is part of our course, Integrity in Business. And the course deals with both the challenges and the ways you can manage integrity at a company. And we deal with bad and good things. Today you will start to hear about the bad things, and then after the pause, you will hear about how to remedy and correct bad things and start a good thing. Okay? So today we have a very special guest, Mr. Thomas Hauser, who is a returning guest in my class. This is the fourth occasion that he's here. We started in 2012, and it was a big success. The class loved him, and loved also the very tense interaction between him and the students. So we re-invited him, and he's a returning guest ever since. He is the global head of compliance at Siemens Healthcare, and he has had different positions at Siemens, coming to this very high position. And interestingly, though he is the global head of compliance, he is not coming from the legal profession, as many of the compliance officers come, but he has actual engineering and managerial background. So without any further ado, I welcome Thomas and the floor is.
Thank you, Peter. And also again, warm welcome from my side. As Peter said, my name is Thomas Hauser. I'm since early 2010 the Global Compliance Officer for Siemens Healthcare. And for those who were able to review the little fact sheet about the Siemens company, you see healthcare is one of the different operation within the Siemens conglomerate. In the past few years, Siemens has always, after a few years, reorganized. The current organization, as you have seen in the handout, is valid since last October, where our fiscal year has started. In the past, healthcare was also on a level which we have called sector, and the era before we were a group, and now we are neither a sector nor a division nor a group. We are just healthcare because we are in the process of getting separated from Siemens. The reason why we are getting separated is kind of reasonable and easy, because certainly industry as an industrial conglomerate and life sciences are not really on the same turf. And to further develop the life sciences healthcare business, we need more independency, and the supervisory board has granted this actually last May, and we are now in the carve-outing process to be a company within the company being separately managed. The reason why I gave you a little bit background about the Siemens company is mainly, and certainly also when I see the diversity here in the classroom, that you see that we are not just a German company, although the headquarters is in Germany, and it's also a reasonably sized company with, from time to time, even more than 450,000 employees, and with all those carve-outs, I mean, just healthcare is also carving out now 47,000. We are with 300 plus thousand employees anywhere in the world, not just in Europe. Because I will talk about big numbers, and you always have to put that into perspective, that it's also a big company. By myself, Peter has mentioned that I'm not the typical compliance officer, although more than 25 years ago I have graduated in St. Gallen with a dual degree, law and economics, and then for the next 10 years or so, 20 years or so, I had traditional commercial technical jobs, being country manager or division manager, also in the world of Siemens. And the famous story. Now I have to check that the big picture comes. And you see the same what I see. Yeah, that's on that side. And in 2006, and at that time I was still responsible for a division with 150, 200 million euro, where I was the CEO. The headlines changed. In the past, we were an industrial company with a credit mark of more than 160 years, a lot of patents, innovations. It's actually not just motor cars or Ubers or washing dryers. Siemens was inventing a lot of other stuff. For example, also the mobile handy. Unfortunately, it was then Nokia who made it really to a success, and not Siemens, but the origin invention came from Siemens and many others. And after the scandal, they were looking everywhere from operational entities to ramp up the compliance organization. So I joined the compliance organizations in 2007, being at the first point responsible for building technologies, which is a group headquartered in Switzerland, where I still live. I only work in Germany. And after 3 years, I have been approached and asked to be responsible for healthcare, which is a similar business like building technologies, similar in the sense that it is highly different to the traditional Siemens business. You see, we have to go into history. And 2006 is the year we are now. Siemens survived actually without any big headlines, the First World War, the Second World War, and many of you know maybe that a lot of other German big companies had a difficult environment and situation during World War with slavery and other difficult stories. Siemens was actually not really touched in that environment. And we were very proud about these 160 years. And in November 2006, the headlines have truly changed. The disaster struck, and we were not only on famous page number ones and in magazines, cover sheets, economical newspapers, yellow press were shooting before Christmas 2006, daily, weekly, with big lectures. Because certainly the corruption scandal is always good for food. And mainly in the industrial area, by history, the most recent big scandal in industry was in 2004 about and with ABB, which was just, well, apology, $4 or $5 million, which is already a good amount of money, right? But prior to Christmas 2006, the first numbers you were able to read was $20 million and more. So this is already a multiplier of what was happening to ABB 2 years ago. And you will find out that the number of 20 million, certainly a huge amount, was very fast, just the start of a very sad story. And you see, the possible scenarios were highly severe. It's not just that Siemens is dependent on many public tendering projects. Therefore, if you cross the red line, the risk to face an environment is very high. But it's also that possible penalties were able up to 10 billion. And certainly, although it is a big company, 10 billion would be something which would be very hard to digest. And you see here the link when analysts, yellow press and many others, and even now in our communication channel, we say that penalties might be up to 10 billion possible. then you can imagine that the first mentioned number of 20 million doubtful payments are not in relation, because you do not pay 10 billion penalties when you have an issue of 20 million. Therefore, the numbers at the very end are much bigger. And maybe you have Googled that. For many, many years, we are and still be number one, but currently there are some trends that maybe another company will push us from the number one place. We can maybe discuss that. And certainly, reputation and damage to the business is obvious when the headlines are not about innovation but a corruption scandal. And I would really like to invite you to immediately ask questions. I have a red line, that's obvious. But we have quick time. We will make a break 10 before 3. 10 before 3. And after 20 minutes we will start. It's not really relevant where I am at the break because I can adjust easily. So if you have an interested in additional questions, please feel free to immediately raise your hand so that we can dive into that. Maybe I can also reflect and say I have already planned to mention that in more details in a later stage. Yeah. Oh, our icebreaker. Thank you. Go ahead.
Answer this whenever it's convenient. But I was interested in one of the Siemens presentations about the ombudsman position.
Mm-hmm.
When it's appropriate, could you talk about what is the purview of that position? How many ombudsmans, how many job positions are there within the entire company worldwide?
Story about the ombudsman I have planned, and then I can reflect your question if this is fine. Because having an ombudsman certainly is a very important part of a compliance system. Does everybody understand the term ombudsman? Do you know what this means for? Okay. And so we will come to that.
But actually, if you could, for my benefit, if you could explain the job description when it's appropriate.
I will, promise. So going back to reputation damage and damage to the business after the scandal. Interestingly enough, because of the program we have launched, there was no quarter where we had a dip in the business numbers. That's very interesting. No? So incoming order and revenue has never dipped. Certainly, the profit for sure, because you will see we have to invest a lot of money to remediate the misery, and this was not free of charge. But the incoming orders and also then the following revenue never dipped quarter by quarter, in the opposite. That's an interesting fact. But certainly there was a huge negative impact, and that's very interesting to mention here in the young generation, because Siemens is an engineering company. And as a top employer, we were always very proud, mainly in the big markets like the United States or in Germany, to be on the top 3. In Germany, it's not possible as an engineering company to be number 1 because we have the car manufacturers. Young engineers, they want to go to Porsche or Mercedes or to Audi. So the car manufacturers were always 1 and 2, but for many, many years, Siemens was number 3 top employer for engineers. And after the scandal, we dropped out of the top 10. Because the young engineers, it's not just about the job and about the first salary, because they are all about the same. It's about what stands the company for. I want to work after my university degree. And with those stupid headlines, certainly it was not very tempting to start in 2007 during such a scandal in Siemens. Because when you say, oh, I will start in Siemens, then the first answer is what? They are rotten. And tripping from the top 3 to top, or even out of top 10, is just a black number, but thousands of young engineers which have not started in Siemens, therefore they were missed in the R&D centers. So there was huge impact immediately. Not really in business numbers, profit for sure, but not revenue, and the long-term damage for reputation. Finally, we have survived. We are back again, but it was a very hard thing. And talking about possible penetrals of more than 10 billions, no company can pay that out of the coffee box. Maybe Google, maybe Google or Apple. I just have seen the quarterly results of Apple, but the majority of companies cannot pay 10 billions out of the coffee box. So maybe even a possible breakup to settle the fines, selling divisions, operational business to get the cash was a true risk. So the only thing the company was able to do is ramping up a task force with immediate actions to be finally the #1 recognized company with an established compliance system, which is now still a benchmark. To give you a certain feeling, in 2006, prior to the scandal, at that time, more than 400,000 employees. What do you think, and our pen shows being #1, how many employees, compliance officer globally, Siemens was engaging prior to the scandal? Just a guess, 420, 430,000 employees. What do you think?
200.
200? Okay. Who beats the number in either direction?
10.
10? Good. Kind of aggressive, huh? Yeah. A third option? None? Okay, yeah, that's even more, huh? Yeah, the fact is, and it's actually really going to the second number, we have less than 2 hands in the headquarters, in the global compliance department, in the headquarters, and every group and every country had a part-time compliance officer, maybe an HR boss, who was responsible on paper for compliance, which was maybe 1 hour a month, to be generous. So it's actually a little team of lawyers, firefighters, and some back office who was the compliance team of Siemens worldwide as a group prior to the scandal. And we have established a compliance program then in mid-2008. What do you think was the number? It's lower in 2015 now. I'm talking now in the middle of the implementation where we have, and I will talk in those 2.5 hours a lot what we have done. What do you think was kind of the peak of our compliance organization? From less than 10 dedicated compliance officers to X 18 months later, only 18 months later. Do you have a feeling? 250? Good.
500.
500 are here?
100.
100? Yeah. We were ramping up to 700 full-time equivalents, which were more than 920 heads. From 2 handful of more than 700 full-time equivalents. And the majority, more than 80%, were from internal departments like myself, coming from a senior position, from a commercial position, from audit, from quality. The responsible task force, where I was then also part of it, we were collecting the people from everywhere. If there was a certain interest, because you can believe me, and even I was battling a few months, because I was not interested in that job, during the scandal, it was not very tempting to work in Siemens compliance. But I never regretted it. Never. So, exchange of leadership team. Like every big company, Siemens had an executive board, then the group board members, the CEOs of the business units, of the business segments, and in the matrix, respectively, the country managers. And certainly, when you have such an issue, you can do it twice, in two different areas. You kill the Indians. That's what you read very often, and the big bosses, they are still in good standing. Or you do it the other way around, right? And what do you think, what was the approach of Siemens? Do you have a guess? When we say, prior to the scandal, the top level 1 leadership team had 13 members, 13. After this remediation in 2009, how many have survived? What do you think of those dozen plus? 3? Not bad. Who bets more?
Yeah.
0? Yeah, that's a little bit difficult, right? Because there's still an ongoing operational business, right?
2? 2?
Yes, exactly. 2 have survived. Nobody has expected that, right? And even on the levels below, there were units where 1/3 or even half were exchanged. So this tone from the top, that not only the president of the board and the chief executive officer have been replaced, but also many other key functions have been replaced, and they have fulfilled the same change of culture, change of management in their respective area of responsibility, because this is tone from the top, please.
When you say exchange, should I interpret it as prior?
Well, in labor law language, this is the wrong word,
Okay.
but definitely they were not working for Siemens anymore.
Okay, that's okay.
I will give you then some statistical data because we publish them year by year in our annual report. Disciplinary sanctions because of compliance, so it is always a good key figure how effective a system is. If the numbers are too big, it's kind of funny, but if they are too small, you also have to put a question mark. Because Siemens is always highly transparent in key figures in the role of compliance, that's also the reason that we publish them year by year. And I have produced a very nice chart where you see the development from year to year. It's interesting, not always going backwards. Tone from the top is very important, and certainly having a chief executive officer coming from outside happened never before in those 160 plus years. Because the CEO was always somebody with 30, 35 Siemens years in his backpack. And now the CEO came from outside. He's, by the way, not in charge anymore. He left the company 1 year ago. But we are still in history in 2006. What is normally the standard case in any type of country, and I have seen on the list that you are coming from many countries, when there is an allegation of corruption or competition law, what does normally happen? Are there any authorities working, or what do you think? Yeah?
No, I was just going to say they usually fire the people at the very top.
Well, this is actually not what usually happens, but Siemens has done it. But I'm talking now more about what does an authority do in their respective country. Well,
it's very cultural, history dependent.
It's kind of true, but every country has a Department of Justice, and normally somebody from the Department of Justice is starting to do an investigation. Famous FBI, for example, or a state prosecutor in whatever type of country. That's a standard process. And I explicitly asked that question and made the remark because in Siemens, there was never ever a public authority like FBI or a state prosecutor investigating within Siemens. And that's remarkable because when you go into other investigations because of corruption, there is always the FBI or BKA or other authorities investigating in the company. And the reason is that actually 2 days after the scandal, after the raid of the state prosecutor in Munich, so certainly they have raided the headquarters, that was the launch of the scandal, and they had good reasons for, because there was this allegation of $20 billion slush funds. But then at the following, there was no formal investigation process against Siemens. Because at the second, third day after the scandal, the supervisory board decided to ask a law company, US-based, with a very good reputation in that context, to start an independent investigation. And this was aligned with the US and German authorities, and certainly also then accepted from them. Because it was also certainly a point how many officers, investigators, the German authorities or the US authorities would have to get into that project. We are still in 2006, early 2007, and they do not have any people. And having this agreement that an independent specialized investigator is doing the on-site work was certainly an interesting setup. And I will give you some insights what this independent investigation finally has fulfilled. And the results were very transparent share with all engaged authorities. And who works in a company with more, well, it's maybe difficult in MBA students, huh? But let me ask differently. Who has ever worked in a company with more than 5,000 employees? Okay, good, there are a few. So I assume that those companies had several subsidiaries, maybe even in several countries. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And is by chance maybe somebody in those companies from a commercial side? Some are nodding? Excellent. So how have you managed the money process? SAP? Oracle?
Right. Yeah, it was SAP.
SAP. Yeah. And how many SAP systems do you have?
Well, I was not directly involved in finance.
Or maybe you have some insights.
As far as I remember, there was just like a one platform.
That's normally an answer which I hear very often, that big companies have one ERP system with a lot of nodes, but they are connected. At the time of pre-scandal, Siemens had more than 1,500 different ERP systems non-connected. Every country, every unit have done their payments, their controlling highly independently. So it was actually not possible to supervise the money flow. Therefore, one big project was to implement an SAP module to centralize all the bank accounts and to monitor, supervise, and control where's the money going. Was not existing before. You can say, how was it possible that a company works like that? That's a valid question, but it was possible with a lot of controllers. 2008, please.
Just a question. You talked about the fact that it was hard to hire new people, talents, at that time. But did
hire is the wrong word because they were transferred from one to the other department.
Okay, but to transfer. But did employees leave the company when they heard about the scandal?
Okay. So I would like to answer the two questions you have. Yes, it was difficult to attract internal Siemens employees to be transferred to the compliance department, because in 2007, the mission profile, the job as a compliance officer, was not existing in the market. If you do the same in 2015, in a job portal, you have 100 jobs. In 2007, even the recruiter was even not knowing the term compliance officer. It was a non-known. So there was a lot of marketing necessary, starting from the people from the core team like myself, ramping up to convince people that this is an interesting job. People leaving the company because of the scandal, we never have tracked that. Because certainly in a company with 400,000 plus people, a retention, respectively, rate of change, 10% plus minus, is actually not only normal, it's good. And it's not the case that those numbers were suddenly jumping because of the scandal. It was not the case, I can say that. But there was no survey that people have been asked when they have the last discussion with HR, because this is a standard process that when someone is leaving the country, the responsible HR rep makes an interview asking, why are you leaving the company? Oh, it's a career step, but outside of the company, etc. And we have not tracked that people have said, oh, because the company is rotten, I have decided to leave the company. We have not tracked that.
Also, do you think it could be a reason that since company was like malign with all these corruption charges and all the other stuff, so people who want to leave the company, they just could not leave it just because other companies might not take it, thinking that
As I said, yeah, I understand the remark was not really supervised, respectively surveyed. I do not think that a third party would reject a good candidate just because he has Siemens in his CV. I do not think that this is the case, with the exception that he was directly involved in the corruptive practices, right? But you find hardly this mentioned in a CV. But I know what you mean. But there is no evidence that I can confirm. So, in late 2008 means, actually it was December, 2 years after the scandal, we were able to apply and to achieve a settlement with the authorities, not only in Germany, but also in the US. And I will give you some insights in that. And we were very proud to have kind of established from nothing a compliance program where I will give you some insights. We have the organization I mentioned from two hands of more than 900 heads with full-time equivalents. The package was about 700, 721, something like that. And we have launched a training campaign where actually the company has never seen before. Because certainly the failure that we faced the corruption scandal was not just an activity of a handful of people. It was an unduly established system, like a company within the company, where hundreds, if not thousands, were involved in a daily wrongdoing. Wrongdoing means illegal, according to local law, clearly on the red zone. And a lot of interviews were done, and so also TV shows and magazines and commercial newspapers were trying to find out how was it possible that such a scheme of corruption was tolerated for so many years. And that's certainly maybe also a little bit of culture that you do not question what the boss and the boss and the boss is tolerating. And we have not really found out what the trigger was but certainly with a training campaign to really transparently say what is the red zone and what is the green zone was absolutely necessary. And I'll give you some insights in that.
Yeah, so before this, you said like a couple of years back, there was a company which was involved in 5 billion corruption charges.
ABB, you know.
Yeah, so I mean, how was the atmosphere within Siemens when this report came out that this company is involved in 5 billion? Because you said even Siemens was...
Zero. Because I guess in the lectures before you have learned what is globally spoken one of the major laws in fighting the cancer of corruption. There are famous formulas in the United States. Do you know what I mean?
It will come later.
It will come
next,
later.
Next class.
Okay.
Foreign corrupt practice.
Exactly. Thank you, sir. FCPA, Foreign Corruption Practices Act of the States. So do you have a memory and a feeling when this was enforced and launched?
What was it back in the late 70s?
Excellent. 1977. The first act, and for more than 20 years, the United States were the only country where corruption towards public officials were illegal. In Europe, in Germany, in Switzerland, in all those famous countries, bribing a public official in the 90s was nothing else than a good investment in the sales process. Tax deductible as a sales expenditure. It was tax deductible. The bribe towards an energy minister somewhere in Asia or Africa. It was a sales expenditure, tax deductible. In the US, it was clearly banned since 1977, but not in Europe. Only starting 2000, 2001, and the OECD convention parallel, this was banned also in Europe. And the majority of international companies then clearly ramped up and decided to not be engaged in those practices. And certainly Siemens clearly failed in that. We have changed nothing. The only exception, what we have done in 2001, we have appointed chief compliance officers on paper. On paper. Training, I give you some insights when we talk about the details, and that's still the overview, please.
I'm interested in the settlement between the German and US authorities and Siemens. Were there negotiations over the settlement money, or did Siemens have to pay whatever the German and US authorities told them to pay?
It's a good question. It was a settlement, so we were never convicted in bribery. It was a settlement. And I will give you some insights when I have finalized the overview. And you still can download the settlement. It's, for those who are interested, it's like a crib. Very interesting to read. Not only training, I have mentioned that there is no centralization of bank accounts, but certainly there are many other processes where we finally have them to be and involve rigid processes. And I will give you just an overview of some examples. What you can say in many companies is in 2015 a standard, but at least in 2008, respectively before, Siemens was not controlling or doing so. And I also have to say a lot of other companies were not doing so. And what actually Siemens has ramped up with a lot of consultants, you will see some figures, is actually a benchmark, and the same consultants are still selling the same stories to other companies. Well, that's also the reason that a lot of articles you can read where you say Siemens is a benchmark of, because we were in survival mode, and we were able to invest in a program with no money restrictions. Because it was black and white. Either we survive or we do not survive. Therefore, if you need, I don't know, 200-300 millions to manage that, go ahead. If you need to hire 700 people, and even former country managers or division heads were transferred to compliance, then do so. And this was 100 million euro just salaries on top. Then, just 1 year later, we had the success of a third settlement with the World Bank, because we have arrived in the context of the UN Oil for Food Program in Iraq, which was funded by the World Bank, and therefore, if you are crossing the red line in UN-funded projects, you are under their regime. And either they debar you, which is very sexy, because the World Bank and all those other international development banks, they are spending a lot of money, mainly in energy and public transportation, where Siemens is interested in. Therefore, debarment was not really an option, but we were able to settle, and we have settled with $100 million, not just to push that into a World Bank's bank account, but we have funded a trust called Siemens Integrity Initiative, and with those $100 million, we finance projects to fight the cancer of corruption. And at the very end, I will give you some insights in that project. Then, respectively, because this was our first success, I have mentioned that, a year later, we have spent over the coming years $40 million in those kind of projects. And with the settlement in mid-December 2008, we have, by settlement language, an engaged ombudsman from the Department of Justice and SEC. And the settlement very often says 3 years or 4 years. Our language was for sure 3 years, maybe a year number 4, but with no rule set. What does it mean that there is a 4th year necessary or not? And that's the reason actually we have it at the very end 4 years. And you see here, end of monitorship, mid of December 2012, full implementation of all recommendations. And I will talk about this mission profile of a monitor. There are hundreds of monitors anywhere in the world, because this is a tool of the US authorities to make sure that a company who crossed the red line is doing well in the remediation. And certainly this is not only one person, it is a team. And it was also about 50 million a year where Siemens had to invest to maintain the team of the monitor. And what I would already like to mention now, Siemens was the very first case and the very first company where the monitor was not a US citizen. It's maybe somebody being aware who the monitor of the Siemens group was. For example, Daimler, you know, the car manufacturer, they had also a monitor because they thrived in Africa in the truck business. This monitor was a former US FBI director. Kind of painful for the company. And do you have some insights who the former monitor of Siemens was? Because it's already a piece of history. The first time I was here, we were still under monitorship. Do you remember? It was Mr. Theo Weigel, the former finance minister of Germany. Very interesting. He was a retired lawyer, being for decades the finance minister of Germany, and certainly with excellent connections to the US authorities, because Germany was always a very good partner of the United States. And it was actually an excellent approach where actually Siemens has brought Mr. Theo Weigel into the game, because this is also the experience now with Daimler, that is very difficult for a US senior to understand how a German company is really working, also by culture. And Theo Weigel, kind of the inventor of the euro, certainly had a very good brand and he finally accepted the mission for 4 years to be the manager of the Siemens Group. In the meantime, already a piece of history. And to close, overview of the history, we launched the second funding round with another 30 million, because it's 40, 30, 30 in a time scope of 15 years to fund those type of projects. And the round was launched in 13, and in late 14 actually we have concluded the projects, which type of projects anywhere in the world will be funded for those type of projects. Last but not least, how can an outside body, government, authority, even an NGO, everybody knows what an NGO is, yes, but to say what is actually a compliance system being effective or not, it's not so easy to decide that from outside. And the answer is that there is an independent company, Dow Jones, and they are establishing since 2006 or 7 a so-called sustainability index. Unfortunately, when they have launched it, we were just a few months old in the scandal, and we had in the compliance category 0 points from 100. Well, it's no doubt, right? But it was not a good start to be rated in such a public index with 0 points from 100. Then in 2008, we were already a little bit better, but still far away from the top class. The good story is 14, 13, 12, 11, we have 100 from 100 points, independently evaluated, and even 2 years before, we have not 100 points, but we were number 1 in the index. And why is this index so important? In public tenders, as you probably know, everything is highly rigid defined because everybody is afraid of being then challenged from the competition who may won the race. And certainly the price is important, the technology is important, with a very detailed point system in a public tender. But what is the third category which is more and more important? What do you think? Sustainability, yeah. It's kind of, I made you a nice bridge, I know. And what does actual sustainability mean?
That it's working for long, that we don't know exactly.
Can you give me some examples?
No, it's natural, the environment.
Environment.
Keep trust.
Good. And?
Trust.
Stakeholders.
Stakeholders, yeah. No children work. Being compliant.
Being transparent.
Exactly. That's a sustainability index. And certainly having an independent NGO saying that the Siemens Group has 100 of 100 points helps in a lot of public tenders where maybe you are not best in class in price, but certainly in innovation and also sustainability. And this helps us to be number 1 at the top list, although we were not the cheapest ones. Because normally Siemens does not sell little VW Polos, we are selling Mercedes since many decades.
Yeah, I was wondering that you say it helps business, but on the other side, I could imagine that in less developed countries, giving bribes is a part of business. And has Siemens ever calculated how much business they are in fact losing because of this initiative that they're having?
Yeah, and that's a question I hear always. When we decide a zero tolerance policy that we do not bribe anymore, how much business have we lost? And yes, indeed, there was a certain tracking because in the new world, the responsible compliance officer had a veto right of all relevant projects. Even if the CEO, the CFO, the head of legal, everybody says we wanted a deal. compliance officer was able to stop the deal. And this veto was tracked statistically. But certainly in every normal environment, and I have also lived that, there were some projects where I wasn't able to give green lights, but normally you do not wait so long till the no-go is physically tracked in the tool. Then you talk before with the senior management, and the deal is never going to a stadium that you say compliance stopped it. So it's even the number we were able to track is not the real picture. But it's also a fact, what I mentioned before, that there was never a quarter where we really had a dip in incoming orders, and that's what you were mentioning, because it is a combination that sustainability, especially in the second half of 2000, was coming with a very strong booster, more and more important. And even if we were not able to offer the best price, we were able to make the deal. But what is even more important, mainly in those difficult countries, and you know, even in 2015, I think you have talked about it, that the world is rotten. Also in 2015. That's reality. And in the past, because it was part of our DNA, the necessary amount to influence key people was calculated, offered, and paid, even before even asked. That's interesting. And now, the same regional heads were forced to say no, because it was also not, even if they were still in mission, most probably it was another person, right? And the same ministry has ordered, nevertheless, the innovation is the trigger. If you decide you want to have a power turbine with that grade of efficiency, or another one, and you see the price difference and you do not get bribery anymore, well, that's a difficult situation. But even in countries where 2-3 years ago it was obvious that we would have paid, we do not pay anymore, and the same country, the same ministry is still ordering, because they were interested in the technology.
I want to ask one more thing. You mentioned that your salespeople would have offered even without asking these. Has Siemens in this settlement offered to come clean and provide a list of foreign officials, be it government or companies worldwide, who accepted bribes from Siemens, and what projects were impacted by that? Is there a list that can be accessed?
No. I mean, that's a known question, but it's not so easy also in data privacy law. And no, this has not happened. But certainly a lot of countries, for example in Greece, because we still read it in the press, they have done their own investigation, and those governmental officials which were involved in those practices where Siemens paid, they are now before court. But it's not that we have whistled names, because this was not possible. Yeah. Thank you.
Did anybody went to jail because of this scandal?
Well, jail, I can say that even level 1 top executive of Siemens were quite a few weeks in jail, and they settled them with a lot of money, several millions. And also in other countries, top executives of Siemens were in jail, even for a few months, because of the link of bribery. And there were also court cases where finally Siemens employees were convicted because of bribery. It's also interesting, and I come to the last row in a second, that with DOJ and SEC in the United States, we have settled as a company. And a few years ago, the DOJ decided to run after individuals for the very first time, after individuals, and they have used the Siemens Argentina case, where they have prosecuted individuals because of corruption on our side and on the other side for the very first time, and it was also Siemens related. But we settled as a company, and we are still under probation as a criminal, right? Because we settled with very strong rules. Last row.
I just want to ask that is everyone in this Siemens group, I mean globally, share the same vision of sustainable and low robbery? I mean,
Yeah, that's
how do you know that everyone think it's the
For-
right thing to do?
I cannot answer for 343,000 employees. Now you have seen the current numbers. And you have to see, and you see them in the next two slides, or the slides after, you see some quotes from outside. Corruption was a standard of procedure for Siemens for many, many years. And the numbers you will find and see, and you will also get them the slide deck for download, is only the time window from 2001 up to 2007. Because in that time window, it was illegal in Europe, right? We have never surveyed the practices in the 80s and in the 90s because we were not linked to FCPA. The FCPA is only relevant for companies registered at the US Stock Exchange. And we have done this also in early 2000. So that's the reason we have to settle with the US authorities, because we have been registered at the US Stock Exchange. And we have to settle with the German authorities, because since 2001 it was illegal under German law. So we have not tracked what happened in the 80s and in the 90s. But it's obvious that it was part of the Siemens DNA. Changing a DNA does not act and goes overnight. It's a huge change of culture program. You can support that with changing leaders, that the tone from the top is different. But we always say you cannot exchange the middle management doing the daily operations, because it's still a company at that time with 400,000 employees. And every month, 400,000 salaries have to be paid. You cannot change that. But with a clear tone from the top, with a clear training, and that's the trigger of those more than 900 people, highly effective detective and preventive controls. And everybody knows that if you cross the line after 2008, you will leave the company with immediate effect. In the past, when I have mentioned those firefighters, if they have trapped somebody crossing the line, well, he was promoted to another job, and the problem was solved. That was the culture. If you cross the red line, you get promoted to another job. Problem solved. In the new world of Siemens, you will leave the company with no parachute.
At the moment, we have like independent organizations that would track whether there is corruption in Siemens. Like would that investigate bank accounts and whether officers in certain countries comply with your plans?
I can answer the following. We have certain processes where we are heavily thinking and also supporting an external certification program for companies to review a compliance system. So also with the integrity initiative that we try to establish a quality standard that an independent organization can review compliance systems and make kind of a certification behind that. That's area number one. And area number two is certainly we also change the external auditor, because all those years we had received the blessing from the external auditor. And you will see, and I have to watch a little bit the time now. I like your questions, but I still have a red line, and I would not like to stop at page number 10, as they have a little bit more, that the external auditor, under the new rules, certainly have also a different mission profile, what they do to supervise our processes and our figures. The old auditor gave us the blessing, although we had hundreds of millions slush funds somewhere hidden in the books. And as I said, it is a combination of new management, of training, because a majority of the people were not aware that they are in the red zone. Because the boss is saying okay, the boss is saying okay, they were not even thinking that they are in the illegal airspace. So training is important, but also the detective and preventive controls. It's not so easy anymore to cross the red line. I do not say that it is impossible, the company is too big. But the combination of highly effective preventive and detective controls and the clear message and also evidence that if you cross the line, you will feel the consequences, not like in the past, is a good threat. In the past, you can say, I can cross the line. If somebody is grabbing me, who cares? I will get another job in the universe within Siemens. Now, you damn know you will leave the company, and the base of my family's happiness is in danger. One last question, and then I would like to proceed, because I would like to start now with the details. Then maybe some answers will come automatically. He is older, and then you can do it.
Okay. I would like to ask you in general, in the primary cases, what is the fine line between the prosecution and non-prosecution cases? Because some companies were brought into prosecution, some were not. Then how do the authorities they decide?
The trigger why the public prosecutor has started an investigation towards Siemens is mainly that actually 3 days after the scandal and the raid, the supervisory board immediately launched the project with D.B. Weiss and Clinton, this independent investigator. And we established a relationship with the prosecutor on a speed and on a transparency that actually there was never a state prosecutor who said, I can do it. Because a state prosecutor, even the FBI, would have not the chance to suddenly engage 200 people into that Siemens project, because the 200 people were not existing. But the independent investigator, he has pushed hundreds of specialists on that project. Well, we paid the bill, you will see the numbers. But the state prosecutor would have not the chance to push this workforce, specialized workforce, in that project. Therefore, it was an easy decision for them to say, as long as I have absolutely transparent, ongoing data flow, what the independent investigation, who was not working for Siemens but for the supervisory board, that's a different. It was not the chief executive officer who has asked for the investigation, it was the supervisory board. And the supervisory board has only the shareholders in the background, nobody else. So that's a big difference. And therefore, there was never a need. I think that's the big difference, to example, to the Petrobras or Walmart or Daimler scandal. Because those 3 companies were, still are, highly resistant in a professional, positive work together with the authorities. And that's also the reason that they finally, when the settlement was done, have a totally different penalty scheme. And we'll see that later. I promised you the last question before I click here.
Yeah. How do competitors of Siemens react to what happened? Did they take advantage of that in some way, or did something happen?
I have to answer, because certainly this is a question which is known in 2 ways. Certainly they were competitors who were trying then to challenge a project in the past before court because we have won the deal because we bribed. When it was a public tender, you can challenge the project before court. And we have not solved that by 100% yet. Because legally, they can challenge a public tender which we have won because of bribery. They cannot redo the project, or at least they can ask for money. And that's the first point. And the second point is certainly that now I lost my red line. I have to apologize. I was going to say something as a second part, and now I have forgotten it. It will come back again. But currently I have lost the line. Okay, I'm sorry. But at least, yeah, having challenges from competition because they lost public tenders, this is certainly a clear topic we have to face. Good. I have talked several times about this independent investigation. This is everything, all what you see here is public data. That's important to mention. What actually this is all about. I have mentioned once, very shortly, the name, DB Weiss & Plimpton. It's a US law company with a lot of subsidiaries anywhere in the world. And important, retained by the supervisory board. And it is a central project organization with a lot of people engaged from the top and middle management. Very important is the program ramp up, then the remediation of the processes, the investigation itself. And actually, the most important point is external and internal communication. So there was part of the program was a big communication department because it's very important to inform shareholders, community, public authorities, because as you see, the headlines were very bad. And you had to actively inform the community, but also the employees, what is going on. The investigation was covering all companies in countries with so-called high corruption risk. And voluntarily, in a much broader scope, actually than the prosecution office would even have done. And you see, certainly, there were some little challenges. Starting here in Europe, DB Weiss was not allowed to enter Switzerland because of local laws. In Switzerland, it is forbidden that a foreign official or a supporter from a foreign official is doing any type of audits or investigations in country. Forbidden by law. The same, for example, in Arabia. In China, I guess I have seen on the list, there are some from China. You have truly a Chinese wall. No local data from China was actually authorized to exit the country. And certainly with so many employees in China, we have a lot of data collection in China. And we hired 70 Chinese lawyers to do the Chinese data collection. But the data was and remains in the country. Because by local law it was not allowed to move the Chinese data into the global repository. More than 1,700 interviews were done between the investigators, no public officials, just lawyers from DB Weiss with our own people. And then, just as we did a little gut feeling, we were in 2008, where the high season was of the investigation. They collected 82 million documents. You have to fill that on the top. So they have a lot of documents, and then they ask the counterpart, oh, you have written in 2002, April 5th, an email to person X. Can you explain a little bit about it? They had the email in front of them because they collected it by the data mining. But do you know what type of emails you have written 5 years ago? This I have no clue. And then, by those interviews, the investigators were trying to find out and they were analyzing the patterns, which were definitely rotten.
What if there was a person who was involved in cases and wasn't working anymore at the company?
Yeah, I mean, the standard answer is, I have no clue. The second answer is, I have no clue. The third answer was, I have no clue. Then, in October 2007, running till end of January 2008, we launched an amnesty program, saying, if you are supporting the independent investigation with evidences and facts, we cannot protect you of criminal law, but we give you a green symbol that we will not fire you. And more than 100 senior managers have volunteered to participate in the amnesty program, and this was a huge success because the rotten corruption schemes, they were done very professional, because it's a German company. When you do something, you do it right. And as I said, internal audit, external audit, they have not exceeded year by year. But with those whistleblowers under the amnesty program, we were able to clear a lot of dust in the system.
Sorry, I want to ask, this independent investigation is for the purpose to make clear of the scandal, or just want to reorganize the organization's culture?
Just to uncover the patterns. Nothing to do with the reorg. Just to uncover the pattern of corruption. I give you some insights. 82 million documents collected. This is not really a lot of money because done by IT. But what was then really costly, and you have also people here from low-cost countries, 14 million documents were reviewed page by page. Average hourly rate more than 500 euros. Hourly rate, not monthly paycheck. Hourly rate, 500 euro, 14 million pages. So you see the trigger where the cash is running. Then Deloitte reviewed 38 million financial transactions. And think about, we have no centralized finance system. There were thousands of ERP systems and thousands of bank accounts, and they collected 38 million transactions with more than 10 million receipts. And this number, certainly you have to put into context of the size of the company, but you also have to memorize, because I will show you, maybe after the break, what actually then the final number was of doubtful payments at the very end, which were not tax deductible. Question up front: how do you do a professional, well-established bribe pilot? I give you an example. Country X, it's not relevant, it's in Asia or in Africa, would like to have a nice power generator. Normally, let's say, average price $500 million. First question: what is the price tag to get the deal? 500 million. How much do you have to invest to get the deal for sure?
20%.
Excellent. Well done. I hear it's rarely, but it's correct. 80 to 100 million you have to invest. That's reality, also in 2015. Good. Is this harmful for the company, this additional 80 to 100 million? No, because the money comes from the development bank, so who cares? They give 600 instead of 500, and everybody's happy, right? So no harm for everybody. Well, it's a little bit like white. But the fact is, yes, 80 to 100, you have to calculate to get the deal for 500. But now, it's a little bit difficult to get 80 million to a bank account of those family. These are always family members, it's not just one person. Right? So how do you transfer 20 million to Cayman, 10 million to British Virgin, 20 million to Geneva, and Cyprus is also very common, another 10 million to Cyprus. And you have to get 80 million to that family. How do you do that?
You hired their company as a subcontractor and overpaid them.
That's quite okay. He's good.
Good at it.
Yeah, sales agents, business consultants. That's the vehicle you normally do it, and I will give you some insights because we have published that how Siemens has done it, but that's the way you have to do it. You still do it in 2015. Therefore, we started in 2008 a new due diligence and a deep dive check on more than 5,000 agents done by Baker McKenzie. They have also done this not for free of charge. And we have immediately stopped any payments to those agents. Black and white, we have paid no invoices anymore, and even now, so many years after, we are still in some fights with some partners because we do not pay their invoices, and they are still fighting for the money, although it was a fake contract to fund the slush. And others have never asked and challenged because it was obvious what the money was for. But from those 5,000 business partners, only a small part finally survived. And that's the point which I have linked and answered many times, all results were really shared with all those prosecutors in the various countries, not just in Germany and the United States. Because I do not say that there is no bribery in the United States and in Germany. Certainly, also in those countries, bribery does exist. But certainly the bribery happened everywhere in the world. For example, Greece, and then it was the Greece authority who was really interested to understand what was going on. And highly proactive, Siemens has provided all insights in those data. And before the break, kind of as the sugar on the piece, the total number. And that's what I said. The first 2 fiscal years after the scandal, there was no drop in revenue and incoming order, but certainly there was a drop in profit. Because we destroyed in 2 consequent fiscal years more than a third of the profit, because we had to pay nearly $1 billion to outside advisors. Remember the million of pages reviewed page by page. Deloitte, Baker McKenzie, DB Weiss, KPMG, Pricewaterhouse, everybody has made a fortune out of the Siemens scandal. Then the settlement with the authorities in Germany and the settlement with the US authorities, and you see 2 logos. We settled with the Department of Justice with 450 million. And I will give you then some insights why it was exactly 450 million. Because interesting enough, now we were, for many, many years, we were number 1 in the settlement with DOJ with 450 million. And now actually, we are not number 1 anymore because another company settled with even more money with DOJ. But because we are also registered on the US Stock Exchange, we had to settle with the SEC with another 350 million, and this was the total number of 800 million US dollar, which is still currently number 1 at the top list. I give you some insights on that. And at the time, in December 2008, the $800 million was 610 million euros. Certainly the currency rate today is different, but the interesting message is that actually, by accident, the settlement with the US authorities and the German authorities were about the same. Now the interesting question is, are there any other settlements after December 2008? And I can only answer before the break, yes, I have mentioned the World Bank settlement with 100 million US dollar flowing into this trust. And we also settled with the Greek authorities with $100 million. And interestingly enough, this $100 million in Greece is also going into exclusive educational training programs to educate Greek students about business integrity and ethics. Which, for those who were in Greece, is really something which is important. And this is truly then a change of culture in Greece. And certainly the 100 million is also a long-term initiative. The difference between the two initiatives is that in the Siemens Integrity Initiative, we ask for projects, and together with the World Bank, we select the projects. So the World Bank has a veto right, and in the settlement with the Greece authorities, the Ministry of Education comes to us and says we need 8 million for that and that project, and Siemens has a veto right. And it's very similar to fight the cancer of corruption, but interestingly enough, there are no further big settlements in other countries because we were able to keep that certainly with a settlement that you have to review and kind of put to an end the case, but there was no financial link that we had to pay X or Y or Z in the respective country.
And also, I guess some countries are not interested in investigating it at all. I mean,
I cannot truly answer that with a clear yes, because even in highly rotten countries, like in Africa, there are always new politicians with a clear label, we want to fight corruption. But the question is how sustainable this is. But it's a fact. I will not sign this with blood, because there is a trend to fight the corruption, because it's a good politician message, right? But the sustainability is always very difficult. Last question before a break.
Very short hint. Is there any statistics about, we talked about the you miss business because you didn't go into corruption. Do you have any numbers that you gained business because you had this?
Only what I mentioned in the early stage, the quarterly results were never dropping. So the balance of not accepting deals and getting additional deals because of innovation and the focus on sustainability balance in a positive way. But I mean, you cannot track everything on such a big company. And then you also have to think about how you want to track it and how sustainable is then finally the number. Because as you know, every number is as valid as the person who designs the number. For those who are in favor of statistics, you can everything prove. Just a question how you design the number, right? But the main message, because we publish that quarter by quarter, is the quarterly results in incoming order was never tripping. Well, let's take a break.
20 minutes.
Do you have a gong or something like that? Or we just are 15 past, we are here again. And then we have another 75 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming back to the class in 5. So we continue with the lecture.
Thank you. So we still have a good hour to go, and the target really is, I'm just about 10-15 minutes in delay, that's not a big deal, to really make the bridge now of the summary what actually happened from the famous raid in November 16, 2006 to the attempt to remediate the mess, to be nowadays kind of a benchmark, certainly for good reason. And you always have to think about that due to the fact that the company, the group was in survival mode, and it was clearly to be or not to be questioned that the company was certainly excellent, outside support was just doing what was necessary in a very short time period of only 2 fiscal years. But you also have to face, and I always use this as an eye-opener after a break, that we destroyed in 2 consequent fiscal years €1.5 billion each, which was 1/3 of the average profit of the group. So you can say 150,000 employees have worked 2 years for nothing, only to cover the external costs. What I have not mentioned, because normally it's always in the context of a question, but now I can also start this as an icebreaker question after the break. When you have an issue with the Ministry of Justice because of public bribery, or as we say, non-tax deductible payments, what is the other department of a government which says immediately hello? I already gave you the hint with non-tax deductible payments.
Well, taxation, right?
Huh?
Tax.
Ministry of Finance. When we are officially saying that we have wrong taxed sales expenditures in our books, you will see the total number. I still want to keep that as a little secret. Then immediately we have to pay more than $500 million additional taxes on one shot. Right. Therefore, you also see that the final number was not the 20 million when you pay $500 million additional taxes. And certainly, it is important to understand that these are only external costs. The ramping up, the new processes, the new tools, this was also not free of charge. But before you ask, we have never tracked the internal costs. There were some countries who decided to establish a no-cost center and SAP code, where the people engaged in the ramping up the program were booking the hours, but there was no global picture what the internal costs were finally as a result. It certainly will be, it is much higher than the 3 billions we pay to outside bodies. And this you really have to understand also to see the big numbers. And I mentioned that the settlement with the authorities, the Department of Justice, was 450 million. And reflecting the settlement I mentioned before, just recently published about 3-4 weeks ago with Alstom, they paid more than 700 million. And now, what is actually the rational, the legal ground to decide what is the appropriate number? And I would like to give you an overview as an extract of the sentencing memo, and it's actually just the law, to say what is the rationale, how a final value shall be in the code. And jumping one slide ahead, Alstom is missing now because it's not, how we say that, there's still a period where they can reject. Yes, they can appeal, but this is still running. And certainly then those 720 plus million, they find its place there as well. But you see here, starting with a Swiss company, a freight forwarder, you see the alleged right payment and the penalty from SEC and DOJ based on FCPA is actually double. Then even here in Hungary, 2011, Magyar Telekom, you see the penalty is multiples. Same for Alcatel, Daimler. Then JGC is about the same, bigger the number where the multiples are not so extreme. And now, surprise, surprise, and you see here the number. The total number of unduly and doubtful payments have crossed $1,400 million. That's a big number. And I always say 1,400 million in only 5+ years. I mean, this has to be done highly professional to get the money out of the company. I mean, that's not just done by a few people. But the story is not about that, because we can discuss it afterwards. It is that the total number is actually the other way around, with 800 in total, including SEC. And here is the formula of FCPA. And you see, I do not want to go into details. If you're curious, you get the slides afterwards. It's a question of a multiplier of the culpability score and the offense level. And it's about how many victims you have, how many millions the wrongdoing is, how it's actually the full cooperation and acceptance of responsibility, which gives you some credits, and then you have a score, and you have a question of the amount from the table in law, whatever, about the pecuniary gain or loss from the offense. So they have calculated that to a value of 843 million. And you see the score is respectively with that calculator. And they say the law that the fine range is from 135 to 2.7. And now, big surprise, we paid only 450, which is 33% of the minimum requirement by law. And if you make the same calculation for Alstom, they paid 140% of the minimum. 33%, 140% of the minimum possible, minimum required offense. And what do you think, what is the rationale? Why we paid only a third, and Alstom paid even more than 100%?
The cooperation with the investigators.
Exactly. The cooperation, and there were no public prosecutors involved because we paid the bill by the Hauser. That's an interesting calculation and rationale to understand, especially because Alstom is now very new and active, that they actually paid more than 100% and we paid 1/3. But the cases are highly different because you can read that in Google or with Google. Alstom was not cooperative at all, still nowadays.
Am I correct to assume that in this case Siemens' lawyers use the argument that if they get the second, the larger part of the fine, they would be forced to close down maybe operations in developing countries, and that would in fact not help, conquer corruption, but in fact fuel corruption. And